The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." He replied, "What do you wish me to do for you?" They answered him, "Grant that in your glory we may sit one at your right and the other at your left." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" They said to him, "We can." Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right or at my left is not mine to give, but is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they became indignant at James and John. Jesus summoned them and said to them, "You know that those who are recognized as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones make their authority over them felt. But it shall not be so among you. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you will be the slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many." The Gospel of the Lord.
Those of you who helped out with our Oktoberfest in any way, please stand to receive our thanks. Oktoberfest volunteers. Wasn't it an awesome event? Yeah, it was really, really beautiful. If you're a member of our Stewardship Committee, please stand. Stewardship Committee members. And let's give them a hand for the great job they've been doing. Thank you. And we'll be hearing from Rachel a little bit later, right? Did I say it right? I was struggling. Is it Rachel, Rachel? I had a lot of stress. Jesus liked to give his disciples nicknames. He nicknamed Judas Iscariot the Zealot. In fact, Judas, before becoming a disciple of Jesus, was a guerrilla, a revolutionary. He nicknamed St. Peter Rocky because St. Peter was very variable in his responses. So Jesus gave him a comical nickname, Rocky. Today, we met a couple of brothers. You remember their names? James and John. You know what their nickname was? The Sons of Thunder. Boom! And you know why Jesus called them the Sons of Thunder? They had an anger issue. If they lived in the 21st century, they'd be going to court for the anger management program, 22 weeks. Well, why were they called the Sons of Thunder? Well, one time, Jesus went to a village and was preaching. And the people there were not receptive at all. And so Jesus said, well, let's go to the next town. And James and John said, wait a minute, Jesus. Why don't we nuke them? No, ask God to send fire from heaven to destroy the town. If they don't agree with us, we'll wipe them from the face of the earth. Very Christian attitude, huh? And so these guys were a little nuts, you know? You have to wonder, why didn't Jesus choose people who were a little bit more stable? Well, ever since I was ordained, I've been asking myself the same question. Well, probably one of the reasons is Jesus likes people with some spirit. You know, they were a little out of control, but at least they had something. You know, a few weeks ago I mentioned the phenomenon of holy chutzpah, and James and John's had it in abundance. And so, Jesus chose 12 people who were not necessarily the best and the brightest, but he saw something in them. So let's talk a little bit about the story we heard today. You know, Jesus has been preparing his disciples throughout the first part of Mark's gospel for his death on the cross. But that message wasn't that uplifting. You know, the goal of my mission is to die. And so the disciples had to go in one ear and out the other. You know, they didn't want to believe in the bad news that was going to become good news, but they weren't aware of that yet, or they weren't mature enough yet to grasp that. But then James and John had a little conversation, and they said to each other, you know, if Jesus is going to die, who's going to take care of this outfit when he dies? Well, how about the two of us? James says, well, John, you're looking really good. And John says to James, back at you, bro. And so they approach Jesus, and they say, hey, Jesus, please do us a favor. And Jesus is very gracious. Of course, what would you like? Well, when you die, one of us wants to be on your right and the other on your left when you get to heaven. It's not that big a deal, really. You could do it. Now, have you ever asked yourself the question, what was in their mind when they asked Jesus for this request? Well, they were very simple people. They were very poor people. And all of their life, they had lived under Roman occupation. And their parents had been under Roman occupation. And their parents' parents had been occupied by Greece. And their parents' parents' had been occupied by Persia, and on and on and on. And they saw in Jesus the possibility of overthrowing the Romans. And they saw amazing things. Jesus opened the eyes of the blind. He opened the ears of the deaf. He made the mute speak and the lame dance. And so they're saying to themselves, wow, this guy's got power. And I think the power went to their head. Has that ever happened to any of you? You know, a little power is intoxicating, you know? So they were feeling real good about themselves, and they were feeling real good about Jesus' chances to make a new life for them and for Israel. Now, lest we be too judgmental of them, they were hoping for a new age of justice and peace in the land. And so they asked Jesus this exorbitant request. And Jesus says, well, you know, who sits next to me in heaven really isn't my decision. You know, I don't fill out the dance card in heaven. Only God the Father does. And then he says, are you able to drink of the cup in which I'm going to be baptized? Now, what does the cup symbolize? Death. And so, when we receive communion at Mass and we drink from the cup, we're acknowledging that when we embrace death with faith, hope, and love, we are given the promise of new life. Can you drink of the cup? Now, once again, James and John misunderstand this. They kind of want to say anything to convince Jesus that they should receive their request. He says, oh yes, absolutely, we can do anything you ask. And now the other disciples are overhearing this discussion. And what was their response? Remember? They were a little miffed. Who do James and John think they are? What about me? What about me? I've got gifts and talents too. And so Jesus has to quell this revolution. And he says, you know, when you look at earthly leaders, let's say the Romans, when they exercise authority, you feel it. You feel the imposition. But it shall not be so among you. Whoever desires to be the greatest will be the least. Whoever desires to be the big boss will be the servant of all. And then he says that phrase that has resounded throughout history, the Son of Man has come into the world not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so, my friends, what have we been ransomed from? Through the blood of Jesus. Self-centered living. Egocentric attitudes. Believing that the sun rises and sets on what I think is right. You know, one of my spiritual directors told me, Al, don't believe everything you think. Yeah, exactly. Don't believe everything you think, because my mind often deceives me into exaggerating my importance and exaggerating my needs and desires. And so, my friends, this gospel is very relevant to two things. First, as the conclusion of our annual stewardship covenant card renewal. Because stewardship acknowledges that all the gifts given to me are just that, gifts. And as St. Paul says, what I have been given freely, I must share freely. So the root of stewardship is Jesus Christ, who comes to ransom us from self-centered living. I think this gospel is very important, too, in light of the crisis we are experiencing in the church today, which I believe is a crisis of leadership. I really get the heebie-jeebs when somebody says, Queen of Peace is Father Al's church. Oh my goodness. What an exaggerated statement. You know, a pastor is only as good as his humility. A pastor is only as good as his realization that any authority he has is a gift, which has to be used for the good of the people. And so, my friends, if we want a new kind of church, which I do, we have to think long and hard by what we mean by the exercise of authority. I can say that in my 11 years as a pastor, I've never gone against a decision made by an advisory group. I can, canonically, but that's not appropriate use of authority. Good authority facilitates a dialogue between the people and the pastor so that all of us can grow as Christian stewards. And so, my friends, can I ask you to do me a favor? Yes? Oh, thank you. Pray for all leaders in the church, and pray for me and for Father Joe that we can work together to really live the gospel we heard today. That whoever desires to be the greatest is called to be the least, and whoever wants to be the master of all must become the servant of all.